Good morning. We can start, I think, the third panel during the Central Lublin Forum. So I would like to welcome you on the third panel that is related to the Balkans in the shadow of war in Ukraine. And I would like to welcome our guests. So we've got three guests in this panel. From my right-hand side, Tomasz Żornaczuk from the Polish Institute of International Affairs from Warsaw. The second guest is Marta Szpala from Center of Eastern Studies from Warsaw. And our third panelist is Igor Novaković from International and Security Affairs Center from Serbia. Also, I would like to welcome our audience. And at the beginning, I would like to pay attention on order that will be held during the panel. There will be like 3 rounds of questions, and every round it will be like 3 full minutes for answers for our panelists. And at the end, we are having a room for questions. So if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. Okay, so yeah, and I forgot one more thing, that we've got like 2 chairs. So Spasimir Domaradzki from the Institute of Central Europe and Jagiełło-Szostak from Institute of Central Europe. Okay, so I think that I will start from the first question. Generally, there is like over 1 year after Russian aggression towards Ukraine. And I would like to ask our panelists, starting from Tomasz Żornaczuk, can you depict or can you diagnose the situation in the Balkans after the starting of war in Ukraine?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'll try to start on a positive note. What shade was put by the Russian war in Ukraine on the Balkans, or what impact this war has had. And this impact doesn't, in my view, directly derive from the region itself, but rather from the developments around the war, with the central point, of course, being the Ukrainian application for the membership that was followed by a strong and wide support of the Central European countries to this application, accompanied by the Zeitenwende in Germany and the French fear to what I call be a front page man by Macron with the titles that this is the guy who blackmailed and not supported Ukraine. So that was basically behind why Ukraine pretty quickly and smoothly got the candidate status. And this, of course, translated into some change of interpretations of the enlargement itself, with the politicians and analysts seeing a shift to a more geopolitical enlargement. But at the same time, some argued that this is actually back to the roots of the technical nature of the process rather than a fast track, because it's simple. The simple procedure is that the country applies and the application doesn't wait for 4 years or whatnot, but is being proceeded right away. So this was also a positive note. This was all accompanied by the significant change of a social perception of both enlargement and the European Union within the European Union. And according to the surveys between beginning of 2022 and mid-2022, that is from before the war and few months into the war, both trust and positive image of the Union rose, but also the support to the enlargement changed significantly from 47% of positive answers on average in the EU to 57%. That's a shift in 10% in roughly half a year, something that was never seen before. In Poland, it got up to 75%, making it in the top 3 countries supporting the enlargement towards the Balkans and enlargement in general. At the same time, the opposition dropped from 40 to 33%, something that also was never seen before. So this candidate status to Ukraine translated into 3 concrete steps in the Balkans. The first one being Northern Macedonia and Albania being enabled to start negotiations, something that was also installed for a number of years already. Bosnia got a candidate status with all the stories, whether we do need a war to become a candidate or maybe you could keep us just like that. And then Kosovo got the visa waiver deal, something that was also in the EU fridge for a number of years. Now it's worth noticing that none of these things came because of a change in the Balkans itself. So Macedonia and Albania were already ready before to start the negotiations, but they were blocked by Bulgaria. The 14 points story didn't change by the European Commission given to the Bosnia and Herzegovina, didn't change that much in the last year, and Kosovo was of course ready since 2018 to get the visa liberalization, but it was blocked mainly by France. It is also worth mentioning that it got the deal, but it will only be implemented most probably as of the beginning of 2024. And so these are kind of positive changes that were brought by the tragic events in Ukraine, but sadly there was also some tendencies that were cemented or even translated into a more negative change in the region. That was of course for mostly Serbia's reaction to the war. We're not going into the details, but we speak about the government, the media, the social reaction as well. And something that was very visible in the report of the European Commission, namely the drop in the foreign policy alignment from 64% in the whole 2021 to 45%, that is less than a half in August 2022. There was also positive changes in this regard in Macedonia and Bosnia, but they were not that big shifts, so to say. So to conclude in this round, I would argue that the state of play in the Balkans in terms of the enlargement is that we have a crisis in this process. I would also argue that that's the biggest crisis in the last 20 years. Next month we're going to celebrate 20 years since the Balkans are confirmed being covered by the enlargement policy after the Thessaloniki summit, and I think this crisis that we have now has started with the big disappointment that came after solving the Greek-Macedonian dispute, and which was followed immediately by the French blockade. So 5th year on, a crisis of enlargement in the region.
Okay, so next speaker, please, Marta Szpala.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here and to discuss the Western Balkans, and as situation on the ground shows, it's like really a timely discussion. I will be more pessimistic than Tomasz. So just ahead the Russian aggression on Ukraine, region was already in the fragile situation. So we have the economic crisis caused by COVID epidemic, which was really severe in case of many Western Balkan countries. The societies, because of what happened connected to the COVID and the government policies during the pandemic, was already, you can feel the frustration in the society. We have the, as Tomasz said, crisis in enlargement, so no positive prospect for the region. We have the undemocratic regimes, but at the same time you have this kind of business as usual policy of the Western powers, EU, US, that Balkans are stable in the instability, so we somehow get used to this, low-level instability, but everybody believes that nothing bad can happen in the region. And when the aggression started, all these problems which were there, Kosovo-Serbia dialogue stuck for 7 years. Yeah, like from 2015 at least. Bosnia and Herzegovina in very deep structural crisis. The tension in Macedonia, tension between Macedonia and Bulgaria. Everything become more evident. And somehow we also, like we as an expert community, we hope that Ukraine didn't divert the attention of the West from the Western Balkan problems. And actually that happened. We can observe US going back to the region, but US went to the region for a quick solution of the problems which were there. And since these problems were really profound and the crisis was there for quite a while, it was really hard to quickly solve them. What also became evident that because also in European Union, in member states, the Western Balkans were off the agenda. We didn't have many experts who are really dealing with the region and knowing what is happening in the region. So it was this lack of capacity in DigiNear, which was weakened significantly in the past years, and also in the member states. Even in Germany, we can see that the old expert on the Balkan left. There were no new because everybody were somehow quite satisfied with the situation. So what happened after that is that there was no creative solution to the problem. Rather, it was the continuation of this policy which proved to be ineffective in the past years. So as Tomek explained, it was mainly enlargement policy and giving the candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina and, somehow promising the region that enlargement policy will be now more effective. But the problem is that nobody is believing in enlargement now in the Western Balkans. And it is not something which makes the leaders in the region to cooperate and to solve the problems which are there. They are playing the same old game, mainly aimed at staying in power, strengthening the clientelistic network, and rather prolongation of the crisis, because this crisis enables them to use this nationalistic mobilization and spreading the nationalistic ideology. And it is also like US, which definitely have this kind of idea at the beginning of last year that we have to solve the issue, that we have to solve Kosovo, Serbia, that we have to solve Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also opted for really quick solution by pushing different actors to come to cooperate more, but it's not like that the region is like it was in the 90s, and US is also not the same country like it was in the 90s. The influence of the US in the region diminished significantly. We have different actors also in the region who plays its role. So instead of solving the problems, this attitude rather deepen them, and we have this kind of proof now with Kosovo Serbia dialogue. We had the clashes yesterday, but it's good to remember that in March both US and UA and EU announced that we have agreement which will lead to normalization of relation and of Kosovo and Serbia, and it is not true. So the thing is that now we have to really, and I think like both US and EU have to somehow reassess their attitude towards the region, reassess situation on the ground, and rather prepare to find long-term solution in cooperation with different actors, because this yeah, this notion that if we push our friends, usually undemocratic leader, for some agreements, nothing good will come from this.
Thank you very much. And Igor Novaković.
Okay, a lot of things were mentioned here, so I will try not to repeat them, but we can go back to that in Q&A and in other rounds. So, but I will just like to highlight several other issues that were not mentioned by my interlocutors. First, the region was hard hit with economic crisis. Actually, inflation is much harder in the Western Balkans than it is in the rest of Europe. Maybe Hungary and parts of Central Europe have the worst inflation and more dire economic situation. But also another important issue, I think, is finally certain movements in the domain of energy. Because for a number of years, apart from the domestic production of energy and electricity, mainly from the coal power plants, the other energy provider was Russia, right? And the projects related to diversification of the natural gas supply were either halted or blocked by the parts of local elites, or as some of my friends call them, local gatekeepers, the guys who were actually profiting to a large extent from these deals with Russia. Now, finally, the diversification projects are ongoing, and some of the countries in the region will have a real alternative to a possibility to import from other places gas, and not just from Russia. So, and I think that this is hugely important. Also, in some of the countries of the region, what we have is also openness, because they realize that with the changes in the EU and with the cease of reliance on the Russian gas, that this energy transition has to be implemented, because all of our countries will be in problem. So basically, and especially in Serbia right now, what we have is the opening of the energy system for the Western companies to enter. It is, happening below the radar, but I think this is a huge thing, because it will actually eliminate the influence of Russia in this sector. So third thing is actually, as Marta said, a renewed attention of the U.S. in particular towards the region, because there is this perception of Western Balkans as a salt belly of Europe. Of course, there were attempts last year, actually in the past 3 years, to do something in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also now in Kosovo. However, these efforts were not comprehensive. I call that attempts to flusterize the situation, actually to stabilize it, and then to see over time with a sort of normalization on the ground to find comprehensive solutions. Now, at least in Serbia, Kosovo case, this backfired a bit, but we will see what will happen, and I can comment that afterwards. But actually, probably the most important thing, and I touched upon that regarding energy, is that in practical terms, Russia is pretty much out of the region. So basically, what we had with the Russian aggression on Ukraine is actually that the practical influence that Russia had, for example, in economy, in policy making on the ground, and especially in Serbia, is to a large extent cut off. What we have now at this moment are only elements related to the energy still, because the only natural gas supply still comes only from Russia, and also soft power. Major economic ties were cut out. Major Russian investments, apart from those that came into energy sector, are out of the region. Russian banks are out, and also trade between the region and Russia is pretty much endangered because of, first and foremost, EU sanctions. Despite the fact that Serbia did not introduce sanctions to Russia, for example, Western banks are applying them. So what we have in practice is cut of these ties. Now, of course, soft power challenges remain, and I can touch upon them later. I hope that I fit into 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Igor. That was perfectly within the framed allotted amount of time. And thank you so much for actually framing the current situation in the Balkans. Many important issues appeared, and we would like to tackle at least some of them, because within the time limits it is impossible. But what I want to pick up on is a certain trend that we observe already over several years, which is that you have mentioned the soft power. Marta mentioned the 20 years. Well, actually, it was Tomasz that mentioned the 20 years, and Marta mentioned the social dimension. And I think what quite often remains out of the radar when we think about the Western Balkans is, what are the social attitudes? How people still see this perspective? You have mentioned the soft power, so is it still alive? Is within the Balkan societies, in particular in the Western Balkans, still this determination that is necessary to force the authorities to make changes that bring you closer to the integration? Or we are indeed somehow prisoners of this concept of stabilitocracy, and we observe trends of growing apathy that in a sense have a negative impact on the perspective of integration? And maybe we can bounce back, so starting again from you, Igor, and going towards Anya.
Well, I don't want to defend Western Balkan stabilocrats, but I have to be honest. And first and foremost, during the previous enlargements of the EU, what we had is a date, so indicative date, and this created actually a backfire effect on the society, that society was also demanding the EU integration process. With this lagging of the whole process, conditioning, and lack of real will, of political will of the Brussels and the major EU capitals for the new enlargement, and with preservation of stabilitocracy, actually there is no real, how to say, belief among populations that there is an actual EU offer at the table, that actually some things are viable. Also, what happened to North Macedonia, first with France and then with Bulgaria, is a clear indication that the process can be interrupted, whenever, by some of the EU member states because of their internal discourses or bilateral problems with the candidate states. So this makes really hard for politicians to put eggs into the EU basket. Second thing, and this goes, I think, for Serbia only, is that we have a political elite that for years was prevented to come to power precisely because of the EU. Until they adopted the EU moniker, which happened somewhere in 2008, 2009, before that they were at best Eurosceptics, and then they become pro-European, the current elite. But they were prevented because of the EU issue, to come to power. So what they were doing after it became clear that they cannot really count on fast enlargement process, accession to the EU, they started to shoot at the EU. They were constantly diminishing the image of the EU among the population, because they were aware, Mr. Vučić is aware, that the EU is a rallying point for the potential opposition. And now we are in the situation that the EU image among the population is ruined, but not just in Serbia, for example, also in Kosovo, with the visa liberalization issue. I mean, Kosovo fulfilled all of the demands coming from the EU Commission related to the visa liberalization. And then, because of the interest of certain member states or their attitudes, they were not granted that. The effect was, in practice, that the EU leverage on Kosovo is now close to zero. And now granting visa liberalization after so many years, I mean, it will not really restore EU power. Now it's a time, and probably we can speak about that, for some more proactive policies, for more demands from the Western Balkans, but also for credible offer.
Thank you very much, Igor. Marta, indeed, protests in Serbia, riots in Kosovo, frustration in Macedonia, and I will even keep mentioning Bosnia. So how do you see these societies and their perspectives of the EU?
I think like everybody are tired, and want a change, but since they don't believe change is possible, they are just emigrate to EU. So this is like what we call individual strategies of EU accession. So we are not waiting our countries join the EU, but we are just moving there. And of course, sometimes in the EU, people put the blame on the Balkan societies that it's your leaders, you chose them. But we have the social protest everywhere in the region in the past years. Albania, Macedonia, they changed the government, although the EU opposed it at the beginning. They didn't support the protest. We have a lot of protests in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also in 2014, it was the protest of all three nations on the slogan, "We are hungry" in 3 languages. So it's not that this is like single ethnic thing, but it's common. Now we have protests in Serbia, the biggest one from 2000. EU is silent on that. So people somehow, and this is also part of the problem, that they see Western powers and EU as allies of the autocratic regime. They also, EU is usually present itself as a community based on value and democracy. But in case of the Western Balkans, they are doing quite the opposite. They are supporting the undemocratic leader from the society which wants democratic change. We have seen Kosovo, when we have the new government, we can assess the policy of Albin Kurti in a different way, but still, he was prevented to be in power by US, which didn't like the policy it implemented. So, you know, society don't believe that EU is an ally for demanding democratic change in the region. And as also Igor said, the society is really fragile because they are waiting too long. 20 years, you know, it's like one generation. Our friend Lucio Petkowski told us that he started to deal with EU accession when he was 18. Now he's 40-something and still he's waiting for EU membership of its own country. He has 3 kids, very happy, but nothing is happening. So, you know, if you want to deliver the change, we have to have the time perspective, you know. It can be 10 years, but, you know, people in the region are just waiting for too long. And as you said, like economic situation, it's really fragile in the region. People are frustrated. And also they are frustrated that the state institutions are failing. It was quite evident in case of COVID. The death toll in case of the Balkans was really big. And they want to have a proper democratic, well-functioning state. They just don't believe it. They can achieve it in their own state.
Thank you very much, Marta. Tomasz.
That's true what our guest from our colleague from Serbia mentioned, that there might be a fear of blockade or of being blocked while on the way towards the Union, because sadly it became more of a rule of the enlargement policy rather than an exception that we were speaking about 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when Macedonia was being blocked for a number of years by Greece, or when we had this 9-month long blockade of Slovenia towards Croatia. But at the same time, and on the other hand, there's also no key reforms. They lack in Serbia definitely, and Serbia is maybe very specific example, because that's the biggest country, that's the, one can argue, most authoritarian one in the region, that for both those reasons most important from the EU point of view, but also some an evident lack of key reforms can be seen also in the way smaller and way more hopeful at some point in Montenegro. I think we can all agree that the government of Abazović was rather a disappointment in terms of the EU integration. And if our hope is not enough, then we can take a look at the report from the European Commission, where conclusion of which is rather that we experience some regress even in some points. So both those things might have an impact of social views on on the European Union or on general orientation of the country, but at the same time it can be a response of the authorities to the social mood. So whatever the reason is, if we take a look at the survey from December 2021, that is 2 months before the war, then we find out that in Serbia, 57% of the inhabitants or the citizens of Serbia would like to see Serbia aligning its foreign policy with Russia and China, 13% with the European Union. Belgrade Center for Security Policy made very similar estimations last year, December 2022, and we see the number didn't change much. There is a significant shift, very little one. So the strategic change is not that the chance might have been missed in this regard, and I think this also tells us something about both the social mood and how it translates into the policy of the country.
Okay, thank you very much. And now it's time for the third round of questions. Generally, we started our analysis, our questions from overall aspects, and you mentioned internal and external aspects. Internal related to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to Kosovo, to Montenegro, to institutional and political crises that happened in those countries. But also we mentioned external actors like European Union, Russia, United States, and so on. But I think that we should pay attention now on the special case that is Serbia and Kosovo relations. What do you think? Whether the kind of stable Kosovo-Serbia relations, this is related to the stabilization of the whole region, Balkan region, and what will be the future of those relations? So maybe we will start from Tomasz. Or from Igor.
Igor can give us an insight.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Maybe if I can add to that, because we will not have chance for the last topic that we also wanted to raise, so we can combine them into, and you are free to pick up which one of the two is what you would like to touch. It is the second aspect that we think is worth talking about, because it is not really present within the debate on the European Union Western Balkans relations. And it is the fact that we tend to look at the Balkans and to see their problems and to tell them what needs to be fixed. But the second part of the story is that there is currently an enlargement fatigue within the EU, and the genuine unwillingness to think about profound promises or tangible results that can really move the process forward. So my question is, how and what needs to happen so that we can genuinely see this process somehow making a step forward? So we can indeed start with Igor and then go back to...
Whenever I intend to think about I'm focused on the pro-European agenda, then we have Kosovo issue popping up, eliminating everything. I mean, right now we had, real democratic, peaceful protests in Serbia for several past weeks, and it's again now the discourse is again shifted in the country, and which is a real pity. Regarding Kosovo and Serbia, I don't know. I mean, the problem here is that we have one leader, the Kosovo leader, that wants to push the envelope and to change the name of the game. Basically, he was the one who rejected the dialogue in Brussels while he was in the opposition. He was the one who demonized and made a problem out of the association of Serb majority municipalities, which after the decision of the Kosovo Constitutional Court, if you read it carefully in the paper, is a joke. I mean, there is no way that this could be a new Republika Srpska, but it was a way for Vučić to sell it to the citizens back in 2013. Right now, on the ground, I think, and also Vučić used the issue of Kosovo for a number of years to stay in power in Serbia. That's true, because he was the one who cooperated with the West and who delivered actually a lot of things to both the Brussels and Washington when it was needed. He was the one responsible for the integration of the North in the end. And right now, he is the one who wants also to stay in power. So this current crisis for him is, in a sense, I'm not claiming that he is the guilty one for what happened right now, but it is probably good for him because he can redirect attention of the public from the protests that are happening in Belgrade. But on the other hand, I think that at certain moments he was genuinely interested to find a solution that he can sell to the citizens of Serbia and to close this chapter. This solution was based on the territorial swap, and that is highly unpopular in the West because it could have a spillover effect on North Macedonia, on Bosnia. But on the other hand, I'm sure that back in 2018, when he was pushing that agenda, that he had clear numbers that allowed him to think that this could be a solution. Right now, the problem is that we have an imposed agreement, a European one, which is in effect a good agreement. If you read what was proposed, what was the original intention, this was really something worth of thinking, worth of supporting. The problem is that it came at the moment when the discourses about the other side, both in Serbia and in Kosovo, were at its worst. So basically what we have, both in Belgrade and Pristina, is a constant dehumanization of the other side. And when the proposal appeared, we had a panel in Belgrade, and I don't know why back then, but I looked really mad at the panel. But I was basically criticizing everyone that they are not focusing on the most important thing that is needed for the normalization, and that is, first and foremost, you have to calm down the discourses, you have to oblige the participants in the dialogue to present the other side, for the beginning as human beings, and not as aggressors, not as wild persons that just want to destroy you. So I'm really, really concerned with what is now happening in Kosovo. So, I think that it will actually really influence the dialogue in Brussels. The only probably game changer that could there be will not probably be the EU, it will be the US. But now the question is to which extent they're interested to invest their political capital, their military also, at the moment when we have a major crisis in Europe. So, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Marta?
Like everything should change. Like I will pick up the question about European Union. So like my personal opinion is that, or hope, maybe not opinion, that Ukraine will change everything. Because now when we have the Ukraine as a candidate country, and I know that my friends from the Balkans don't like it, and they don't like to be compared to Ukraine. But we have devoted civil society, a strong capacity administration. We have the political elites who are really aiming to join the EU because of security concern. So it's not something, it's something which also secure Ukraine as such. There is a possibility that this quick progress of Ukraine will also create a pressure to the political elites in the Western Balkans to do the reform and to change something, because we have this kind of community of laggards in case of Western Balkans, mainly because of the EU. EU never missed opportunity to kill the chances for a change. It was in case of Macedonia. It was even in case of democratic changes in Kosovo, that when they have the leaders who want to deliver, they did something which really make it impossible. So that was also like we can discuss if the focusing on the dialogue in case of Kosovo, Serbia was a good strategy. Maybe it was better to somehow focus on the internal reform in Kosovo and solve the problem, make the the institution more stable in Kosovo, and then in the next step to move to the dialogue. But speaking about what EU should do, I don't know. Like we have prepared a lot of recommendations for the EU, because now we have really weak leadership in case of enlargement. DG NIR, as I said, it's really weak. We have a Hungarian politician on the top, which is not reliable partner to focus on democratic reform, both in the Western Balkans and the EU. He don't have authority to convince the member states to proceed with enlargement. Actually, it's quite opposite. He's the warning signal for the member states. But what I'm afraid, because you said what is supposed to change in the European Union, that we are now in the EU entering into this mode, we have to reform ourselves. And this is also this kind of discussion we have for ages, that, you know, EU can't widen and deepen at the same time. We have to prepare to bring new members. So first of all, we have to think about our internal reform. And it's engage a lot of energy of the member states to come up with idea like how this new European Union ready for like 9 new members should look like. And I'm really afraid that we internally will be focused on this problem, not thinking about how to bring these 9 countries closer. So I really do hope that Ukraine has this kind of determination that will force EU to focus on enlargement and negotiation, and also create the positive momentum in the Western Balkans.
Thank you very much, Marta. Tomek?
I fully agree with what Marta said on the internal reform of the EU. I think that's the subject for countries like France, that simply those who don't want enlarge. In my very opinion, this is a very theoretical academic discussion on how to reform before 9 countries join. Because I just remind you that within the last 20 years of enlargement policy in the Balkans, 1 country joined, and it was Croatia. And if I ask you how many of you believe that another country will join by the end of this decade, I don't expect any hands being raised in this regard. So speaking about 9 countries within the EU, that is not my generation dilemma, definitely. Sadly, of course, as well. Hope in Ukraine is another sad conclusion from this, but I also agree that actually everything has to change, starting from some of the EU attitudes. I mentioned you in the previous round, in the first round, that we had 3 main developments in 2021, and yet we do have a crisis in the policy, because from these points in each of those 3 countries, there is no clear or whatever, even ambiguous prospect to move any forward. So as for Macedonia and Albania, that's of course a clear EU fault, and making the blockade a rule rather than an exception, and then even enabling Bulgaria to steer this process while it is already in the negotiations is even bigger failure of the EU. So of course, when I'm saying that, we all of course think about my qualified majority voting, something that is off the table for now, but definitely some legal changes are needed. The Kosovo issue, as you mentioned, was also the visa liberalization was not a fault of a country that is a candidate, but also a fault of the EU. But there is also a number of examples where the EU didn't harm or hamper the process that much, and yet it is somehow not going with Montenegro somehow being a classic example for last 2 years. So there was nobody blocking, there was nobody hampering, the trust was there, the new elite was there, the hope for the change was there, and somehow the steps were taken towards or backwards, let me put it that way. So legal obstacles are there in some countries, and that's where we should think about changes within the EU. But I also think that a big part of the change is needed within the countries itself, including its elites and reforms. Yes.
Just intervene.
Please, Igor.
You know, because I'm really keen to give my contribution regarding the EU. I'll be really quick. I think that we need new and creative solutions. So Belgrade-based European Policy Center, together with CEPS, so a think tank from Brussels, they formulated a proposal for stage integration. And this is to allow countries to join certain institutions of the EU even prior to official enlargement, yes, and without right to vote, but also with a right to access parts of the EU funds. So their idea is actually that this could create some sort of domestic demand, and also a hunger for the local leaders to see that there is something in front of them. And also, I think that the EU should concentrate at this moment on 3 countries that are showing some prominence, and these are Montenegro, Albania, and North Macedonia, because this could create jealousy in the region. So both Albania and North Macedonia, at the very least, are showing for a number of years now undeniable EU hunger, and yet they are constantly being blocked. Yes, I know that there are a lot of problems with these countries, but the EU could have worked with those elites. What will happen when we have, again, Demirel, for example, in power in North Macedonia, I don't know, but maybe the EU or the member states are missing the chance that they had with the current government.
Thank you very much, Igor.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. And I think that we are running out of time a little bit. So we've got 15 minutes for questions. So if you would like to ask any question to our panelists, please do not hesitate to ask.
Please.
I would like to ask about your opinion of criticism which Kosovo government receives from the United States and European Union diplomacy for placing the newly elected mayors in the government building in the 3 municipalities in northern Kosovo with the using of Kosovo police. I mean, we know that United States and European Union criticize every decision which could lead to tensions, but does it not is freezing the situation in which the illegal Serbian structures are running Kosovo in practice, not the Kosovan?
Thank you. Maybe we can collect several questions and then answer them all together. So please, any other questions?
Please. So the tunnel of that and freeless I'm working more on Northeast Asia, so my question would go in that direction. What is your view on the Chinese influence in the Western Balkans, and especially if you compare it to the Russian influence? But yeah, if you could especially focus on the influence in China and disinformation, and of course the practical aspects of it.
Thank you very much for this question. Any other questions?
Two is enough. No, two is enough.
2 is enough. Since 2 is enough, then I think the questions are addressed in a general manner, so all 3 of you are free to take your positions. Igor, Kosovo. You raised the bell, so let's be on you. Yes.
Yeah, again about that. I mean, first and foremost, Mr. Kurti wants, at least this is my opinion, I'm ready to defend it. He wanted to change the status quo. I understand his argument that without elected mayors, that actually these municipalities cannot function. But obviously there were ways, even after their election, and their election was legal, but not legitimate, meaning that they got just a fraction of votes in the north. So at maximum 3%. So these mayors can be only technical mayors, but not real mayors in a sense to have the full legitimacy, because people boycotted the elections because of certain decisions made in Pristina. At least that is their official discourse. So he had every chance to make them technical mayors, to fulfill their duty, and actually to make step by step, a sort of temporary solution that could lead to a transition period, and then to have a proper election somewhere where the situation normalizes. He opted for the entry to the municipalities, which is a highly symbolic thing. And the question here is, for example, in Serbia, we went a long road until we integrated our minorities after the fall of Slobodan Milosevic. With ethnic Hungarians, actually our issue with our Hungarian population, Belgrade's issue with Hungarian population actually shaped the legal framework for the accommodation of all minorities in Serbia, and we have 22 of them. So basically, there was a dialogue which led actually to the accommodation of minorities. So, and we have certain provisions that I think if Mr. Kurti saw them, although he's claiming that he is for that kind of solutions, that he would be quite against them, because they are, under quotes, undermining democracy. So what I'm trying to say, that it's always duty of majority to integrate minority and to initiate a dialogue. And you cannot really sometimes enforce certain decisions, especially if the wider security of the region is at stake. And that is why Antony Blinken already at the beginning of this year publicly called Mr. Kurti to halt. He ignored. US State Secretary. Now we had also a number of appeals to stop with the process because it will cause instability. And this was the outcome. So I just had a call with my friend from the north, who is actually, two of them, one is working for UNIC and one is from the civil society. And they said that the position of the local Serbs is such that they are genuinely really enraged by the treatment by Pristina. And you can find a lot about that in the report on Kosovo by the US State Department, which was issued in February. So I'm not claiming and not quoting Serbian sources, but independent observers. And related to China, if I should continue, yeah, it's quite complicated. I think that in a moment when there was a sort of a stalemate of the EU and Western interests in the region, and also, if I may remind you, after the crisis in 2008, 2009, what we had, in effect, was the outflow of investments from the West that entered the Western Balkans. So basically, local leaders were fishing for money. And of course, Chinese came. And Chinese, then it was framed after that, I think in 2013 or 14, into Belt and Road Initiative. They actually offered a perfect deal for the local, stabiliocrats. One is a lot of money, basically, as one of my friends, advisors for the foreign direct investment said, for Europeans, if you want to obtain some funding, you have to present, a ton of elaborates, the documents, etc. With Chinese, you write a proposal on a piece of toilet paper, you give them that, and you will get the money. And so easy money. Then also it was projects that were finished quite quickly. So the leaders had an option to present success to their voters because they are thinking in 4-year cycles, and also an alternative fund, to the West. So, but for years, this was not challenging in political terms. It was mostly, challenging from the fact that Chinese were quite tolerant regarding the corruption and the lack of rule of law. So, for example, in Serbia, we have an agreement between Serbia and China from 2009, which was actually amended 3 times. And basically, because this is an interstate agreement, it has stronger power than domestic laws and constitution. And that means that all laws that were adopted at the EU push, with the EU push on, for example, public procurement were circumvented. So all of these deals were really favorable, regarding corruption. But in political sense, now, political influence of China was not that important until very recently. So last year we had, it was 2021. China opposed the election of the new High Representative in Bosnia. So it was not, it did not avoid to vote, but they were openly opposed to the proposal coming from the West, together with Russia. And this was the signal that China is becoming interested in the region in political sense. And also now, with their brokering of this deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think that China could potentially become even more interested in the region and actually be a sort of replacement for Russia.
Thank you very much, Igor. Thank you, Marta.
I could a bit challenge your opinion about Kosovo government. So I'm totally agree with you that Kurti lacks patience to deal with to have some creative solution how to integrate Kosovo Serb, especially from the north, and somehow this treatment of all people in the north as the fifth column of Alexander Vučić, it's something which also deepen the problem and deepen mistrust between two sides, and it's really complicated. And what I'm afraid somehow that this situation and rebuilding the trust needs time, and nobody has it. Like Vučić, Kurti, US, EU, time and interest, and this is problematic because, of course, Serbs in Kosovo North they are really in fragile situation. They don't trust Pristina. They are exploited and instrumentalized by Belgrade, and they have nobody to count on. So there is a lot of frustration, and of course, there is a lot of local structure who don't want any peace and stability in the region. So I think this is a problem that everybody should step down and think calmly about how to deal with the issue. With China, I agree with you, and somehow I will maybe build up on what you said about Russia, that because of the war, Russia is somehow out of the region in economic terms. And also China, we have a lot of reports about how China is influential in the region, but I think it is now time for local leaders to pay the bills. So it was easy money for quite a while, and now we have to pay back the credit. It is also a problem for Vučić now, because he built a lot, but now he had to pay back. There is also pressure from US, and we see that a lot of countries, due to this relation between US and China, withdraw from any dealings with China. It's Albania, no Chinese investment, Macedonia, no infrastructure investment, one steel mill which is left there. Kosovo never has any relation with China. And also the thing is that China don't have money. They also have the economic problem. So it's not like that now they like this. Yes, this stream of money is over, and also Serbia somehow. Serbia experienced that because there is no new investment. And I think what is now quite problematic, that we can see that also with China, you have to pay somehow them back. And the question is, what would China would like to get? We have a lot of natural resources in case of Serbia. Copper mines are now in Chinese hand. There were some, probably some ports which China would like to take over. So I think somehow this is this kind of reality check, that it's not like that China is giving money for free, and it will be quite problematic for whole region.
Thank you, Marta. Tomasz, last but not least, and we conclude.
To be added maybe on the first issue, only on the Kosovo issue, thing is that indeed the message from the EU is somewhat blurry, but I think it comes not only from the lack of developments in the dialogue recently, but also from the very pure fact that the EU stance on very independence of Kosovo is very diverse, so to say. So there's usually strong member states position that somehow navigates the situation rather than a very strong common EU stance on that issue. And I fully agree also that this move by Kurti was perhaps the sign of his lack of patience, but then we come to something that is rather an imposing directly the thing rather than imposing something that is derived from the deal that is not there. So and we know from Iraq already that imposing democratic solutions is not the best idea the West can share with the partners. So yeah, let's see how it develops. But the situation is not easy. Yeah.
I would just like to mention here to quote one of my colleagues who said the following thing, that instability in the north was not that the German-French proposal for the normalization was created to calm down the situation in the north, but on the contrary, his theory is that the announcement of the new proposal instigated the crisis in the north to prevent its application, because he claims that both leaders are quite dissatisfied with the proposal. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Igor. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, we come to the end of this panel. I'm impressed how many important issues we raised within this 1 hour. And as usual, we remain with this feeling of lack of time and unsatisfaction that we cannot talk for the rest of the day. But that might be a good suggestion for our institute to think about a daily forum instead of a session. On that note, I would like to thank you so much for excellent comments and together with Anya for the fact that you find time to join us here in Lublin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.